Welcome to Session 3 in the UC Migration Webinar Series. I'm Rich Steves, Web Editor at TMC.
And I'm Alan Percy, Senior Director of Marketing at AudioCodes.
So, what can we expect in Session 3?
So Session 3 is really about moving off the PBX. This is the next step for a lot of businesses. When they first implemented Voice, probably integrated their PBX with Microsoft Lync. Now they're starting to analyze what's involved in moving off the PBX and moving more of their users to a pure Lync environment, which is a big step for a lot of businesses. So it needs to be planned carefully. There's a couple of technical hurdles and challenges involved in it.
So who are the presenters in this session?
So the presenters for this particular session is Francois Helmert. He's an architect of the Voice Center of Excellence. He brings over 20 years of experience in enterprise IT consulting. In his current role, he's the architect to help drive and deliver large-scale Lync voice deployments. Prior to the Voice Center of Excellence, Francois worked as a delivery consultant for Microsoft Consultancy, and he's a great presenter and a good contributor. In addition to that, too, we're also going to be joined by Matt Gillen. He's a solution architect at Proficient, and again, he brings over 15 years of IT consulting experience, focused mainly on government, legal, financial, and healthcare sectors, and he's going to introduce a customer case study walking us through the migration process.
Excellent. Sounds good. Let's hear what they have to say.
All right.
Thank you, Alan. Welcome everybody to this already third session, and today's topic is about moving off the PBX, moving off the IP PBX. And what I'd like to discuss with you is some of the real life experience I have from my projects working as a consultant and architect from Microsoft doing Lync implementations. The objective for tonight is I first want to run by a couple of scenarios, common scenarios on how to connect Lync and how to enable enterprise voice within Lync so that it can talk to the PSTN and we can do telephony functionality and we can bring telephony functionality into the Lync environment. I want to run you by some common scenarios and give you some recommendations on the architecture, and then also touch on challenges and things that I commonly see in discussions with my customers. I hope with these questions, with these scenarios, I can give you a better understanding of what you should be thinking of when moving Lync to enterprise voice. Additionally, I want to discuss some configuration topics, things that we have to do to get Lync and the PBX or Lync and the PSTN integrated. And finally, I like to run you by some lessons learned and experiences. So let's first start off. Oh, one second. Let's first start off, what do I mean by moving off the PBX? What we're doing is, in most cases, looked at as we're replacing the PBX. And that is one of the things that I think we're not doing. We're moving the end user functionality from a siloed infrastructure for telephony, a siloed infrastructure for mail or instant messaging, into what we call unified communications. It's all about the end user, and the end user will have a different experience. He will no longer have different solutions for different ways of communicating. We're moving everything into unified communications, and by that way, we're enabling the user for communicating and collaborating, and we're no longer focusing on one specific modality. As I said, we're not replacing the PBX. We like to talk about it as UC enabling the user. We're offering a rich and better way of collaboration and communicating to users. If we look at the first starting point when discussing Lync and Lync Enterprise Voice, my colleague Thomas Binder talked about the core components of the Lync infrastructure, components you need for conferencing, you need for IM presence, and all the other functionality Lync offers. We're now taking it a step further and we're going towards enterprise voice. And the first question I always get during these talks, and this is especially in the talks that we have with the people from the telephony team at your customer, is how will I connect Lync to the PSTN? There are a lot of things that we have to think of, but the first question always is, how do we connect? Well, if we look at the picture on the left side, this is a typical deployment at our customers that we first enter. It is an existing PBX with existing handsets that usually reside on the desk of an end user, and this PBX is connected to the PSTN. When we're looking at this type of implementation, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, when we're moving users from the PBX to the Lync environment, what will happen to the existing functionality they have? For example, what would happen to the numbers, the extensions these users have? Everybody is used to dialing an extension of an end user, and what does it mean if the user migrates from the existing PBX to Lync? Does he keep his existing extension, or does he get a new extension? This type of question will severely affect the way you will implement your Lync environment, because it will determine the technical solution. But at the end, it's still something that the end user will experience, and I doubt to question if this is a really technical thing or if it's a user thing. Dialing habits is another thing. Users that have been using the PBX for many years are used to special dialing habits. They know that if they dial, for example, a 4-digit number, this is a 4-digit number within his own company. If they want to dial an outside line, they dial a 9 in front of the number. And so they have a lot of dialing habits. You have to make sure that you understand the dialing habits that the end users have grown accustomed to over the last years. And for every dialing habit, you have to ask yourself, is this something that we're going to implement in the Lync environment, or is this something that we will be maybe changing or maybe even forgetting about? I have some examples on that on one of the later slides. Class of service is also a well-known feature from a PBX. Class of service that determines if a user can, for example, make calls to international destinations or premium numbers, or what kind of features a user has on his phone. Something that you have to understand in the traditional PBX world, and you maybe have to duplicate, or at least part of it have to duplicate in your new environment. The last thing is the special telephony features, because what we typically see is that most of PBX users can be grouped into groups of users. Like 80% of the users will use standard straightforward telephony functionality. Incoming calls, making outgoing calls, transferring calls, blind calls, all the standard PBX functionality. But there always is a group of users or maybe devices that have special functionality. Special functionality like hunt groups, or maybe special phones like the phones in an elevator or the phone at the entrance of a parking lot. So make sure you understand the large group of users that you can identify as just normal telephony users, but also address all the features and special functions that they have implemented over the years. It's usually a very small group of phones or users, but it's also an important group, and you don't want to miss out on them. Talking to your telephony team, in most cases, the discussions tend towards technical discussions and technical requirements. I like to turn this around. I like to talk from the perspective and point of view from an end user, because the end user is the only thing that will experience the outcome of your technical discussions. And if the end user does not want to change his number and wants to keep his telephone number, that means that you have to find a technical solution to address that business requirement. So in most cases, you will be addressing the user's needs, and the business requirements for this kind of solutions are the most important ones. If you connect to the PBX, the first choice you have to make is, how are we connecting to the PSTN? Are we connecting to the PSTN using the existing PBX that is at a customer side, or are we connecting directly to the PSTN? Both solutions got pros and cons. If you look at connecting through the existing PBX, why would we want to do that? Well, in most cases, it's the most likely way to do it, because traditionally there has always been a PBX at a customer side, and that customer and the telephony team is the first team you turn to when you want to do something with telephony. So connecting to the PSTN means automatically connecting to the existing PBX. One of the benefits of doing so is that in this case, the existing PBX owns the number plan. And if you want to do a number portability while migrating a user from the existing PBX to Lync, it's very easy to accomplish. Within the existing PBX, you can change the number routing, and you have the control over the number plan. So users don't have to change their number when migrating from one solution to the other solution. Also, internal calling. Calling from the existing PBX to Lync or from Lync to the existing PBX is at no extra cost. If the PBX deployment is complex, is large, and maybe spans the globe, different locations, and maybe is interconnected via their own network, you can benefit from the existing telephony network, the existing PBX network to make, for example, external calls, outgoing calls. Last but not least, there is a certain trunk capacity from the PBX to the PSTN. The number of calls strongly depends on the existing trunk capacity, and you can benefit from that existing capacity. But there are also a number of reasons why you should not want to do this. And this is very important to understand. If you look at connecting via an existing PBX, you will immediately introduce PBX dependencies. If you connect Lync to the existing PBX and you have to do an upgrade or maintenance on the existing PBX, this will automatically mean that Lync will also suffer from downtime from the existing PBX. This is maybe something that you might not want. You will be faced with additional cost, because connecting from Lync to the existing PBX might require additional licenses, hardware or software. And if we look further down the road, and if we're successful moving users from the existing PBX to Lync, at the end, what will happen to the existing PBX? The existing PBX will just sit there, act as a gateway, but have no users on it and no handsets. There's no added value other than it's just being a gateway. So looking at the future, this might not be the way to go. The biggest benefit to choose this kind of approach is to keep the own number. It assures number portability, and the user can use his own number while migrating to Lync. If we look at connecting directly to the PSTN and reasons why we should do that, I think the first reason is very clear. It's easy and fast because it is a straightforward connection. You use a gateway or you use a SIP trunk, and there is no other components that you have to rely on. No additional configuration, no extra hardware licenses. It's just a straightforward connection to the PSTN. What I see during my first initial talks with users, especially when we're talking about proof of concept or pilot deployments, this is the road we take. This is the most easiest and direct way to connect Lync to the PSTN. But there's a downside to connecting directly to the PSTN, and the biggest disadvantage of such a connection is, of course, the number portability. Connecting to the PSTN means that in most cases you will have to issue new numbers, new dial-in extensions to the end user. We need additional trunk capacity, and in short, it means that when you're migrating a user from the existing PBX to Lync, the user will just get a new phone number. So both solutions have both pros and cons, but the biggest con for the connecting directly to the PSTN is, of course, the number portability. So what we might want to do is consider a third scenario. And as the subtitle for this slide says, this is where advanced gateways show their true value. This is when you start doing more than just gateway functionality. So if we want to address all the pros and cons from both solutions that I presented on the first slide, and we want to make sure that we maintain number portability, we want to avoid any dependencies on the PBX, but we also want to make sure that we can benefit from the capacity that's already there and facilitate an easy migration. What we want to consider is maybe adding a gateway as an intermediate platform. The figure on the right bottom of the screen shows this kind of configuration and installation. So we start off with the traditional solution of PSTN connected to the PBX and the handset. We then introduce an additional gateway, a qualified gateway, that we put in the middle between the PBX and the PSTN. If this is deployed, Nothing has changed for the existing situation. The PBX still connects to the PSTN, but the only thing that changes is that all calls coming in and out run through the qualified gateway. What we then do is we connect the Lync infrastructure to that same gateway. So now we have a gateway, for example, an AudioCodes gateway that is connected to, on one end, the existing PBX, on the other hand, the new Lync deployment. And we then establish a connection from the gateway to Active Directory, and we use information in Active Directory to control the call flow. Let's look at how that works. So we've got the setup, the intermediate gateway, and we now have the two environments that connect to that Lync gateway. Sorry, to that gateway connected to the PSTN. What we're introducing is the concept of dynamic routing decisions. The routing decisions that the gateway makes to route incoming calls to either the PBX or the Lync 2010 infrastructure depend on the outcome of queries to Active Directory. So what happens? If a call comes in, that call automatically triggers a search to Active Directory or cached information from Active Directory in the gateway. And the destination number is there's a lookup for the destination number in Active Directory. And the outcome for that lookup could either be Active Directory is not aware of that destination number. And in that case, what will happen is the call will be routed to the PBX, a default route. So the number comes in, it's checked against Active Directory, there's no mention of it, and it will automatically revert to the PBX. The other possibility is that there is a match in Active Directory, and this means that somewhere in Active Directory a user is enabled for Enterprise Voice within Lync, and this user is assigned a telephone number that matches the destination number. The moment the telephone number is matched in Active Directory, the routing will be automatically updated and the incoming call will be sent to Lync 2010. So by simply enabling users for Enterprise Voice and assigning them a telephone number, that is enough to change the routing and to make sure that an incoming call for a specific user on Lync is automatically routed to Lync. The only thing we then have to do is we have to remove the extension number from the PBX to enable calling from the PBX to Lync. This was a scenario that we talk about a lot, but what you will see is that some of your customers do not like the idea of an intermediate gateway and being dependent on another gateway. That is of course fine. It adds added value with migration, but connecting to the PSTN or connecting to an existing PBX is still an option. Let me discuss and maybe further detail these different ways of connecting. What I've done is I've painted a picture of the most common components that a normal Enterprise Voice deployment will have. If we look on the left side, well, indicated by the red dot, this is where we have the core components for Lync, front-end server and back-end server. These core components are then are the heart for the Lync deployment, and every user that is Lync enabled will be homed on what we call a pool. When we start adding Enterprise Voice, we will be adding at least two components. We will be adding a mediation server and a connection to the PSTN. And this connection to the PSTN can either be directly to the PSTN, as shown in the first gray block on top, which means that we have a connection through the PSTN gateway using ISDN to connect to the PSTN. ISDN, of course, is the traditional way of connecting. We're slowly moving into an area when we talk about SIP trunking, SIP connection, and this is where example 2 steps in. We have a connection from the mediation server via a session border controller to the PSTN. Both gray blocks depict a way of connecting directly to the PSTN. If we're connecting to an IP PBX or a legacy PBX, the difference being that the IP PBX is enabled for SIP, for IP connectivity, and the legacy PBX is not, we either connect directly to the PBX, or we connect using a Lync qualified gateway, such as, for example, an AudioCodes gateway. These are the most common components. The last component that we'll add to the existing Lync setup is a monitoring server. The monitoring server is a component that is not directly related to enterprise voice, and it's not needed for connectivity. But if you're serious about deploying enterprise voice and you want to make sure that you're ahead of calls that that talk about poor quality, or you want to make sure that you're proactively monitoring your network, this is where the monitoring server steps in. The monitoring server will help you assess the call quality of calls over the last period, for example, a week or a month. You can group them by location or network area, and you want to make sure that you use these reports to address, for example, issues you have in your network, or other issues with people using non-qualified headsets, and everything you can do to improve quality. Also, the monitoring server will help you to do troubleshooting if users call and report a poor call quality. It helps you to drill down the calls that were made, and it helps you to understand what went wrong in a call. Let's look a little further into the different connectivity methods. First, the direct connectivity from the Lync server to the PSTN using a gateway. This is the traditional connection, and one of the biggest setbacks is that it is location bound. An ISDN connection will be at a certain location, and there is no possibility to share the number plan or the connectivity over different locations, which will make high availability and site resilience a little difficult. So you need a gateway to convert from IP to ISDN, and the moment you hook it up to the PSTN, you're in business. The second option is to use a SIP trunk, and we see this more and more. The SIP trunk will enable you to do exactly the same as ISDN, but will offer the benefits of scalability and flexibility, and it's no longer location bound. SIP trunking providers are qualifying their solution for Lync. Every month we're adding new SIP trunking providers, and this is a typical deployment how you would enable SIP trunking in a Lync environment. If we look at the connectivity methods to connect to existing PBX, we first have to find out if what kind of PBX this and what kind of support this PBX offers. If it's an IP PBX, there might be an option to connect directly to the Lync server without an intermediate gateway. But if it's a legacy PBX and it does not support IP, then you'll probably have to deploy a gateway and enable ISDN to connect to the PBX. You heard me talk a lot about qualified devices and qualified PBXs. One of the important things is that every device that connects to Lync, either a headset, a webcam, but also PBXs, gateway products, SIP trunking providers, E911 solutions, all these solutions have the possibility to become a qualified solution. And what this means is that the vendor of that solution, for example, the vendor like AudioCodes, will offer their gateways to a third-party laboratory, and this third-party laboratory will check its interoperability with the Lync environment. It will run a series of tests, and by the end, if all tests were completed successfully, the product will get a qualified for Lync marking on it. This helps us when deploying in the field to make sure that the solutions we're deploying have been tested on forehand, and we're not running into problems when deploying it on site and figuring out if it works on site. I would strongly recommend you to look for the qualified devices solution and look at the website. I've listed the URL here to figure out if your equipment is supported under this program. The moment you connect to the existing PBX, this is when you start talking about E164. E164 is the numbering format that is used internally in Lync to to represent telephony numbers. E164 is a standard that is defined by the ITU, and it defines a way a telephone number is built. The biggest benefit of a E164 number is that it's a globally unique number. Lync is fully built on E164 numbers, but the issue we have, or the challenges we have, is that most users, but also most PBXs, do not understand E164 numbers. So in order to work with E164 numbers, we also have to help users and help PBXs work. What we will be doing is we will be looking at the dialing habits, and these dialing habits will translate the way users commonly dial numbers. For example, dialing a 4-digit internal number, they translate these numbers into E164 numbers. I've provided a couple of examples of common numbering formats, for example, like a 4-digit internal number. What we will do is we'll provide a solution within Lync to accommodate the dialing habit a user has and translate it to the E164 number. My tip would be to carefully consider all the different dialing habits that you will be presented with. Some of them are really related to making life easier for the end user. Some of the dialing habits are just there because they are tied to the PBX and the way the PBX is implemented. I've provided some details for reference, but my recommendation would be check every dialing habit and use common sense to either replicate it or not replicate it. What we will be doing is, when implementing Enterprise Voice, we will be implementing normalization rules to help users dial internal numbers and do normalization. Dialing habits not only come from a user perspective, also the PBX has a way of representing numbers. As said in the previous slide, the PBX normally does not understand E164 numbers, and we have to make sure that the number format we are sending out to the PBX or to the gateway is being understood by that gateway or by the PBX. What we have to do is, as soon as we hit the PBX, we want to make sure that we translate the numbers. So within Lync, we will be implementing normalization rules, but reverse normalization rules. What these normalization rules will do, or the translation rules better called, they will translate the E164 number to a number that is being understood by the PBX. So at the trunk to the PBX, we will be adding some manipulation. Class of service is another thing that is commonly known within the PBX environment. We're controlling if a user can use or is not allowed to use special functions on his handset or special telephony features. What it also controls is destinations, outbound destinations. Not every user is entitled to do international calls. Not every user is entitled to do premium line calls. How Lync does that is Lync applies voice policies to end users. These voice policies enable or disable features, but they also assign typical classes of service to end users. And if a class of service, or we call a PSTN usage record, is assigned to a user, it entitles the user to use or to connect to certain destinations. So what we will be doing is we'll be assigning voice policies and we'll be assigning PSTN usages to control the features and the destinations. If we look at the big picture of all these different things that I just discussed, the first thing we will be doing is we will be implementing dial plans. And the dial plan is something that helps the user accommodate his dialing habits. The normalization rules that help him translate his numbers into the E164 format. The second thing that we will be implementing is voice policies. Voice policies that control PSTN functionality and control destinations. We then define routes from Lync to the outside world, and for the routes we assign PSTN usages. In this way, what we do is we assign classes of service to different routes, and we make sure that everybody can only dial extensions that he is allowed to dial. The last thing what we will be doing is adding trunk configuration. making sure that the E164 format is translated to a PBX format and that the PBX can handle the calls to the outside world. If we step into the lessons learned, looking back at the different implementations I have done, is the first thing that is always a problem is do not mix up technical requirements and business requirements. Unified communications is all about the end user, and it's all about the end user experience. And my suggestion would be use the business requirements as a starting point and then start looking at technical requirements. Do not use the technical requirements to dictate the end user's functionality. It's all about unified communication. We're talking about unified communication. We're not talking about replacing the PBX, because if we're just replacing the PBX, we're missing out on the biggest part of UC, which is collaboration using all modalities. Escalation from IM to telephony to voice conferencing to desktop sharing. Things like that. That is what we're adding, and we're not doing just PBX replacement. The Open Interoperability Program is very important. Make sure that all your devices, all the things that you connect to the Lync environment are on that list. It will save you a lot of worries afterwards, and it will guarantee supportability of your solution. Assess the network. The network is the only thing that in most cases is outside of your control. You're doing a really, really nice Lync architecture. You're making sure that everything is on the right place, scaled exactly the way it should be. But then all calls run over the network. And if the network is not performing or is not providing enough bandwidth or has other characteristics that are not sufficient, you will suffer during your deployment. Make sure that you assess the network and you are aware of what's going on. Use the E164 number format. It is very easy to use a different numbering format. But what will happen is that afterwards you will run into problems with routing and making your solution a really global solution. Do not use any other format than E164. Deploy link monitoring. As said, link monitoring will help you assess the call quality and help you actively work with the call quality on your network. And as last, if you're deploying gateways, really make sure that you establish a working relationship with your gateway vendor. Because as a consultant from Microsoft, what I usually are asked is, can you please configure the gateway for me? After the project is over, the gateway sits there and the customer has no idea what to do with it. And this is where you have to make sure that on forehand you establish a really good working relationship with your gateway vendor. So in this case, let them do the work and let them continue the follow-up and maintenance for these gateways. For your convenience, I've added a list of resources about public documentation on Lync, the Open Interoperability Program, and more on Lync itself and devices qualified for Lync. I know this was a very short session. It's a 15-minute session, and there's a lot more to talk about, but I hope it was interesting enough and it triggers you for a follow-up. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Francois. I appreciate the content, and also too, I think we also had a backup slide here that we'll include in today's deck that has a number of terms that were commonly used in his presentation. Next, I want to turn the call over to Matt. Matt's going to share with us a customer project that he and his company Proficient have accomplished. And so, with that, Matt, take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Alan. And again, thanks to everybody for joining today. I'm going to be walking through a case study that we did for a customer deploying Lync and integrating Lync with PBX using an AudioCodes gateway. And what's interesting about this is everything that Francois just talked about, the gateway, the placement of it, SIP trunking, PRIs, how to connect in, the dial plan, we were faced with all of those different questions and scenarios. And that's what I'm real excited about walking through this case study, is it really does touch on almost every aspect of Francois' presentation. So hopefully we can get you some exposure to a real world project that puts to practical use a lot of the good knowledge and experience that Francois just shared with us. So first, real quickly, I'm from Proficient, formerly Point Bridge. We're a national systems integrator for Microsoft. We have about 15 offices across the nation and roughly about 2,000 employees. We're a gold certified partner for unified communications, so both the voice and messaging. And we've completed, I would say, many dozens of OCS and or Lync integrations with PBXs. So a lot of hands-on experience working with customers who are looking at integrating with PBXs or potentially even replacing PBXs. And what we're going to talk about here today is, in particular, we had a customer of ours. It's a large private advertising agency. And we had just completed a project for these guys to deploy Lync for IM and presence and desktop sharing for all of their users. Just rolled it out. Everyone was really happy with it. And we sat down with the VP of IT as the project was wrapping up, and he said, guys, this was great. The only thing that could go on better is if you could help me make a decision on what to do with my PBX. But I know that's not your area of expertise. And we looked at him and said, well, do tell. You realize that having just deployed Lync for you, we've put in the infrastructure to do IP telephony. That Lync is IM and presence, just like but it's also an IP PBX. And he said, yeah, I heard that, but I don't know. I'm not convinced about it. We said, well, look, let's do this. Let's take a couple minutes to take a look at what you're trying to do, and we'll be honest with you and tell you if what you're looking to do can be accomplished with Lync or not. So he sat down, and he told us, well, I've got this Avaya, and it's end of support for the code that we're on. So we either have to upgrade it, and that's going to cost me a bundle of money, or I'm just going to have to put in a new phone system. So we took a look, and they had Avaya S8500, single big site, and they were using third-party for audio conferencing, third-party for web conferencing. And as I mentioned, they already had Lync for IM and presence. So we sat down and gathered some requirements, and it turned out that they didn't have a whole lot of complex telephony requirements. They were mostly just placing calls, receiving calls, did a little bit of call routing. And we said, look, here is the best way to gauge whether or not this is going to work for you. We hooked him up with a couple Polycom phones for Lync and rolled them out to his IT department and said, guys, why don't you take a look at what Lync can do for you? We'll give you these phones, play with it for a couple weeks, and then come back and tell us if you think this is the real deal or not. So, of course, he took us up on it, and since Lync had already been deployed, there wasn't a whole lot of extra work that we had to do to get his folks using these phones. So he came back and said, after a couple of weeks, he said, yeah, you know what, we've used these phones, they're great, they do everything that we need. Let's make it real. What do we need to do to use Lync as our full-time phone system? And we came back with a proposal that showed he needed phones, obviously, and the real key component to making this work was getting a voice gateway in there that would do exactly what he wanted. So we proposed using an AudioCodes gateway, and we loaded this thing up to the hilt with features and functions that he needed. So we used a Mediant 1000 gateway, which is modular, and that allowed us to put in a couple PRIs in order to connect to the Avaya PBX. It allowed us to put in some analog modules to handle fax machines and actually an interface to their overhead paging system. And we included a survivable branch appliance module so that we could build in some redundancy. Their Lync deployment was primarily off in their main data center, and the phones were at their main office. So we wanted to ensure that they could have some survivability in case the link between their main office and the data center went down. And the last thing that we did was we accommodated a request of his, which was, guys, once we move on to Lync, I want to get off of my current contract with PRIs and I want to move to SIP trunking. So this solution was really elegant. It met all of his needs, and frankly, it was in a single box. So we had one gateway acting as the session border controller to do SIP trunking with the outside, with PRIs to coexist with his Avaya PBX, and analog ports to handle the analog devices in the office. The only thing he needed after that was a bunch of handsets to roll out to the users to replace the Avaya handsets. So I've described it in pretty good detail, but I drew up a couple pictures here to give you an idea of what was going on. So you'll see the existing Avaya PBX right here had existing T1s out to the PSTN. We just dropped in a couple of PRIs right here into the AudioCodes gateway, and that gave us the connectivity that Francois was talking about. This was our entry point into the PSTN. It was the gateway through the PBX and out to the PSTN. And coming back the other way, in order to get PSTN calls down from the Avaya, routed over to AudioCodes into our pilot group of Lync users, we just set up a little bit of forwarding in the Avaya that said anytime a call comes in for John Doe, he's one of our Lync test users, we're going to forward that call over to the AudioCodes, and that's going to route it into Lync. That let us keep the same extensions. So when we picked a pilot group of users, they didn't need to print new business cards or change their phone number. Every time we migrated a user to the Lync pilot environment, we just simply forwarded their phone number onto these trunks here to the AudioCodes. Now we've added in a second piece, the SIP trunking that I talked about. So this same AudioCodes gateway can act as the session border controller to hook us up to the SIP trunk that the customer had ordered from AT&T. So this gave us the ability to continue to service Avaya through these PRIs and temporarily coexist and route those over to Lync. But we had all the functionality that we needed in this gateway to terminate SIP trunk, so that when we had moved the majority or almost all of the users over to Lync, we could then swing the PRIs, the numbers that were on the PRI, over to the SIP trunks, and we'd end up like this. So all of the calls coming in through the SIP trunks, hitting the AudioCodes gateway routing to Lync, and we have Lync phones deployed out to all of our users. As I mentioned at the very beginning, the key for us was getting a voice gateway in the environment that would let us simultaneously coexist with the Avaya and provide us with what we needed to ultimately replace the PRIs and move to SIP trunking, and at the same time continue to provide analog functionality for fax machines and interfacing into overhead paging. When we presented this solution to the customer, for him, it was a no-brainer. He had already invested in Lync. He had already invested in Lync licensing and rolling this out to his end users, and he knew that he had to do something. He had to spend money in order to continue to provide telephony service to his end users. What he got with Lync, just by buying an AudioCodes gateway and some Lync, in some Polycom Lync phones, was not just a PBX replacement, but he continued to leverage Lync for IM and presence. Now he can use it for telephony, for audio conferencing, for web conferencing, for all of the different silos that Francois was talking about. We were able to bring those in together and successfully deliver all components of that UC solution in a single nice, neat package versus the old way of having a PBX only just be providing telephony solution. So for the customer, it was a no-brainer. He saw that by investing a little bit more in his Lync environment, he gained a lot of features and functionality, whereas simply upgrading the Avaya would have only continued to use the Avaya as a PBX with dial tone only. And as brief as that was, that is my review of the case study with Lync and AudioCodes for our customers.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. Real good peek into some where the rubber hits the road, some real customer projects. And I've got a couple of just a quick comments here, and then we'll move on quickly to. I can see there's a pile of questions, really good questions that have accumulated here. We're looking forward to getting to all of them. So a couple quick thoughts too about some migration considerations, and I think this reinforces somewhat what Francois said, and also what we've heard from some of our other partners too, is that really, business factors really affect the long-term role of PBX. There are a number of things, besides technical issues you have to deal with. Certainly, the existing contracts and maintenance costs for that PBX platform. That might be under a long-term lease. It may have been purchased, but is not completely amortized. There may have been, some relatively new equipment that's purchased, or new equipment that needs to be purchased for that PBX. And you as partners, of course, need to take that all into consideration when you propose your solution to the end customer. We also think it's important that you go out and survey how the PBX is used. I think, even especially the last two sessions of this particular webinar series, the end customer situations had some interesting twists in them. And those twists can include things, for example, automatic call distribution with ACD, specialized, park, hold, and pickup. And, perfect example, talking to an end customer who was looking at using this kind of solution for auto shops where he's got mechanics out in the floor, and they're used to that, the front desk answers the call, use overhead paging, park the call, and then go over and, hit a line button to retrieve the call off a phone. So that usage or process for working with the phones, I think, need to be considered when they're making a proposal. Then also, too, they need to take an inventory of the non-UC devices or endpoints. So we've already mentioned a little bit about what to do with fax machines, and we'll get into that in a little bit more in a second here. But other devices like overhead paging, these door entries in harsh environments like the pool or in a parking lot, or the emergency phone that's in the elevator. And matter of fact, that photo over on the right, I took about 2 weeks ago when I was in Cleveland. I was just standing by the subway station. I noticed that, and I thought, gee, this is exactly what we were thinking about, that, there's these specialized devices that act as a phone, and a lot of folks sort of forget that they're out there. So it's really important, we think, for you as partners to understand your users and to make that decision with them about, keeping the PBX and, what role does it play. So I put together a little bit of logic here that just to get you thinking about it. And when you first get engaged, you might want to ask the questions about, what kind of PBX investment is there. It's not uncommon that the person you're trying to sell to is also the person that spent all that money on the PBX, so his personal investment is very high in it. Or maybe it was the previous CIO who made that decision, so there's a very low, not only personal but financial investment in that device. And then you have to look at those special applications. Is there ACD or contact center or special features like the park and hold that maybe don't quite exist, or there's no equivalent in the Lync environment quite yet that would need to be implemented as part of your deployment. So really what this drives you to is one of two situations, either where you look at the situation, they've got a low PBX investment, there really are no special applications, and you could use Lync to replace the PBXs, for example, in the situation that Matt described, or in some of our previous case studies, or it goes the other direction, which is where you're going to integrate Lync into the PBX, and you're going to develop a plan, a long-term plan for that PBX replacement. Maybe purchasing other enhanced applications like contact center and other functions that would be layered on top of Lync to provide that functionality down the road. And again, you as a partner or as an end customer, need to go through this logic together to come up with what is your strategy and what's your next move. So a couple quick architecture diagrams here I wanted to show. Francois did a phenomenal job of showing the drop-in. We call it the drop-in insert architecture, which has the PSTN trunks going to a gateway, and then a gateway making the decision going to or from the PBX. This is a very, very common implementation method, and it's where we used to enable their existing PBX. A lot of our end customers like this concept or this strategy. Some are a little nervous about having the trunks go through a gateway, but certainly if you do a good job, you can overcome that issue and help them see the value of it using, again, Active Directory for call routing and some other tricks. The other next natural step then is moving to this PBX replacement architecture. This is where somewhat what Matt showed, which is where the PBX is removed, and instead you've moved over all the phones, all the users, and fax machines, analog devices over to FXS ports on a gateway, whether it be standalone gateway or included in the original gateway that's providing the connectivity to the PSTN or to the SIP trunks. So again, two great architectures. We covered them a little bit more exhaustively in our first session in the series, and I encourage you, if you haven't had a chance, to go back and take a look at that. So a quick summary of some of the platforms that we've got available to build these solutions. You heard about analog gateways with our Media Pack line. And then, we've got a number of different digital gateways, some of which can also act as session border controllers or survivable branch appliances, with our Median 800 and Median 1000, Median 2000 and 3000, all going up in density and capability, eventually all the way up to our 16,000 port Median 8000. And don't expect you to memorize all this information. Of course, certainly this is all available on our website, and quite useful. And just one quick note about this, one of the unique things about working with AudioCodes, you have access to all this technology, and it's all built on a common core code base, which means if you sat down with one of our media packs and got trained in a class and got used to the user interface, if you sat down in front of one of our Media 3000s or 8000s, you would immediately recognize the user interface and be able to work effectively in it. Another thing I wanted to also mention this month is about our 360-degree support program. This is a key part of what we think makes our partners successful, is having someone to call, the backup when it comes to your design validation, also when it comes to implementation, the assistance necessary during maybe a cutover, to be able to support off hours and specialized skills necessary to do Microsoft Lync migration, and this is a powerful asset that we highly recommend folks lean on as part of their deployment.
Once again, lots of great information in that session.
Yes, very much so. Yep.
So what can we look forward to next?
So session number 4 is about SIP trunking, and SIP trunking really is about cost savings, and we're going to talk about what's the process of integrating SIP trunking with Microsoft Lync. Some of the steps, hurdles, and some of the technologies needed to do that.
Great. Very important. Definitely something you'll want to check out.
Yep.